Welcome everyone to our exclusive Scope Live Q&A with renowned author, physician, scholar, and judge of this year's Scholastic Scope's First Line Contest, Dr. Sayantani DasGupta.
Hi, Varun. It's a pleasure to be here.
Hi. So Dr. Sayantani is the New York Times best-selling author of critically acclaimed Bengali folktale and string theory-inspired Kiranmala and the Kingdom Beyond books. The first book in the series, The Serpent Secret, was named a Bank Street Best Book of the Year, a Booklist Best Middle Grade Novel of the 21st Century, and an E.B. White Read Aloud Honor Book. I think you agree that's pretty incredible. Please share your questions in the chat for Dr. Sayantani.
Yes, absolutely. Thanks, Varun. I am so happy to be here with you and with all of our friends on Facebook Live. As you saw, the series that you were describing, the Kiranmala series, has 3 books, but I don't have 3 hands, so I was trying to hold them up awkwardly. So thank you so much for describing them. And I'm happy to chat with you more about them.
Okay, so today Dr. Sayantani will discuss her writing process, tips for aspiring authors, and the exciting Scope First Line Contest, which is accepting entries right now.
Yeah, and I'm excited to tell you more about the Scope contest, which involves writing short stories based on some first lines that I've created. Importantly, completing that story and sending them to us by March 14th. I'm also excited to share that 3 lucky teachers who are joining us today will win a free Scholastic Scope subscription and a copy of my novel, The Serpent Secret. For a chance to win, go ahead and share your questions with me in the Q&A. Also, we love reading your tweets, including pictures and videos of how you use Scholastic Scope in your classrooms. So if you're live tweeting during this event, be sure to tag @ScholasticTeach, like on the screen, and hashtag Scholastic Scope.
Thank you for that. Okay, let's get started. How old were you when you first became interested in writing? And at what age did you begin your career as an author?
Oh my goodness, it was a long gap because I became interested in writing as a very young person. At age 7, my father bought me this multicolored spiral notebook. And the piece of advice he gave me, I'll give to all of you young writers out there, which is he said, never throw away your writing, never dishonor something you've created. You want to honor it, you want to keep it, you want to write it down, even if you change it later or edit it. Always keep everything you write. And that's the piece of advice I'll give to all of you. So I did. I started writing poetry and short stories around 7 or 8 years old. But then I had a whole other career, Varun. I'm a pediatrician, and then I was a teacher. So I was doing all sorts of other things. And I wrote books, but not stories. I wrote kind of, books about health and healing and different things. So it wasn't until my own kids were, almost teenagers that I published The Serpent Secret. So many, many years later.
Wow, it's great that you started writing at such a young age. And that's a really inspiring story. So my next question for you, Dr. Sayantani, is in what ways did your South Asian heritage inspire your writing?
I love that question, Varun. I absolutely love that question because I think it's really important that all of us get to celebrate all the different parts of ourselves. And that's actually The Serpent Secret is a novel about a girl who has to discover her superpowers only by kind of accepting and acknowledging and celebrating all the different parts of herself. And in fact, the Kiranmala series is based on the Bengali folk tales that I would hear on my long summer vacations to India from my grandmother. And she would gather all of us kids under the mosquito net, when the fan would be going. Have you ever slept under a mosquito net, Varun?
I don't think so, but we
Oh,
used
it
to
can
have
be
a
really,
that's yeah,
oh, it can be really magical. So it would be this like
yeah.
magical little space. And she would tell us these great folk tales, and that was the inspiration for the Kiramala series.
That's amazing. And yeah, I really want to try sleeping under a mosquito net. But yeah.
And have somebody tell you stories, because then you really
Yeah.
you feel transported, or I did. And whether it was the stories or just being in the place where so many people loved me, and and I was surrounded by so much love and family, or a combination of all of those things, it felt really magical.
Yes. So many of us know you from your inspiring TED Talk, Radical Imagination. Children's literature changes the world. Can you tell us a little bit more about why it's important for kids to read and write?
Well, Varun, I really think that children's fantasies, like the Kiranmala series, um, they're in the business of, yes, telling great stories, but they're also in the business of radical imagination, which is, I think, exactly the tool we need to make a better world. Like, think about it, even in not fantasy stories, right? In children's and YA fiction, mice can talk or
Yeah.
fight with swords, right? And little girls have big red dogs as best friends. And wizards can fly on brooms, and young people can overthrow corrupt governments, or right injustice, right? Just by kind of banding together and knowing that they have to do the right thing. And I
Yes.
think that, children's fiction has always been like a roadmap to the future, like a blueprint to tomorrow. Because I think that when young people read, they get practice to think about what they want their future world to look like. And now, particularly, I think if there's any time that we've really needed this kind of radical imagination to plan out how we as human beings are going to make this world more equitable, or deal with climate change, or deal with kind of all the myriad unfairnesses that are in the world, I think we're going to need radical imagination, and we're going to need the ability to love people who are like ourselves, but also people maybe who aren't like ourselves at all. Kind of have a radical love towards our smaller and bigger communities. And I really think that children's and YA fiction has the potential and the responsibility to help us do that.
Yes. I really loved your TED Talk. It really touched my heart.
Thank
But
you so
yeah,
much, Fern. That really is touching for me to hear that from you.
thank you. So can you tell us about the Caramel and the Kingdom Beyond trilogy? Do you have any favorite character?
Um, Absolutely. I'll be delighted to tell you. I think I already told you, Vern, that so my parents are immigrants. They came to this country from India. And
Yes.
so I was growing up in this country. And in a sense, the stories they would tell me were like a bridge, right? A bridge back to where I came from. And then these vacations I would take, where I would, get to hear stories from my grandmothers and aunts and uncles. They were like another sort of an emotional bridge, right? And so when I tapped back into these Bengali folk tales, I actually went to a lot of real stories, and then I changed them. So Kiran Mala, my main character, is based on a real Bengali story from Takumar Jhuli, which is like a collection of folk tales. Grandmother's Satchel is the translation. And she's a real character. She's in a story called Orun Borun Kiran Mala, which is a story about her two older brothers and her. But the story is a little different than my novels go, because in the original story, Kiranmala is kind of overlooked. Her brothers are a little bit mean to her. They go off on adventures and they tell her, oh, you don't get to come because you're the youngest, you're the girl, you have to stay at home.
Yeah.
But when they get in trouble, Baran, who do you think has to go rescue the brothers?
Caramel.
Kiranmala. And so I kind of loved this idea of like an underestimated heroine. So I took her, I got rid of her mean brothers, and I put her in New Jersey, and I gave her a kurta and combat boots. But she's definitely my favorite character.
Yes, and I really loved in the book how like she hated being a princess, and then it turns, and then there's like a plot twist that she actually was, and that too from another world.
Exactly. So, I think everyone at some point thinks, oh, my parents are just exaggerating. And, if your parents are like, oh, you're a princess, you're a princess, you're a prince. Or they think, oh, the stories my parents tell me, they're just made up. They can't be true. And Kieran Mulla thinks this. She thinks she's just a regular girl from New Jersey, and that all the wacky stories her parents tell her aren't true until she realizes, uh-oh, they really are. And she really is a princess from another dimension. And at the beginning of the book, this guy, a Rakkosh monster, like breaks into her kitchen and whisks her parents off to a different dimension. And she has to go save the day.
Yeah.
And I don't know if you can see, Vern, can you see the quote on the back? But even though in the beginning she didn't want to be a princess, in the name of the Garden State Parkway, I am not a princess, she says, but she is.
Yeah, that's a big plot twist. But since we're at the topic of the Serpent Secret, what inspired you to write it?
Well, Vern, when I was growing up, which was a long time ago in this country, I never got to see protagonists, heroes, and heroines who looked like me in the stories I like to read or the movies I was watching or even on billboards, right? Or commercials or that kind of thing. And it kind of gave me this message subconsciously. Well, if people like me aren't out there being heroes and heroines, in the stories I like to read, maybe somebody like me can't be a hero or a heroine, can't be a protagonist. And that's a completely false message, right? I don't want anyone to have that feeling. But when, many years later, I had my own kids and they were becoming big readers like I'd been. And they complained about the same thing to me. They said, Mom, we love these stories we're reading. Mama, we love these stories we're reading, but where are the kids who look like us who get to have adventures? I said, enough is enough. And I don't want my own kids to ever feel like they can't be the hero of their own story. So I reached back to my grandma's folktales and I started writing The Serpent Secret almost like a bedtime story. I wrote it kind of chapter by chapter, the very first draft of it, for my own kids who were maybe 8 and 10, maybe a little bit younger at the time. And that's how it all started. And I took my grandma's folktales and I mixed in some string theory because why not? Because I've always loved space. And I like this idea that maybe we immigrant families, maybe we're like a kind of space explorer, right? Maybe we're a kind of galaxy hopper. Maybe we have our foot in like different worlds at the same time. So that's how Bengali folktales got mixed up with space. And that's how I read the series.
Wow. I don't know if you know this, but thousands of Indians, they're inspired by your writing. And now they actually know there's like some hero that's actually Indian. And you're a huge inspiration for them.
Oh, thank you, Varun. And I also just want to say, there are so many wonderful, we're speaking of South Asian authors. There's so many wonderful South Asian authors out there who are writing all sorts of different stories, adventure stories and realistic fiction stories and sad stories and happy stories and adventure stories and quiet stories. So there are more and more and more of us out there in every community. And so that makes me really happy that it's not just me. I'm really, really honored that people love my stories, but I'm also honored to be a part of an author community that's growing.
Wow, that's great. So, Dr. Sayantani, you're a doctor who originally trained in pediatrics and public health. How does this training influence the writing you write?
So, Varun, do you know what a pediatrician is?
Yeah, they're like the doctors who kind of care for the kids.
Yeah, exactly. So, sorry, I didn't mean to flip the tables there on you and ask you a question.
No.
So a pediatrician is a doctor who cares for kids. Usually we think about a pediatrician like with their stethoscope, listening to the heart or the lungs, caring for kids' bodies, right? But pediatricians also care about kids' minds. We also care about kids' families and environments and their kind of spiritual and emotional well-being as well. And so to me, being a pediatrician and being a parent and being a teacher and being a writer for kids is kind of coming from the same place in my heart, because it's all about representing kids, making sure kids see themselves in stories, in a wide variety of stories, and also just recognizing that, stories can be good medicine, right? It's not just kind of pills or liquids that are medicine. Stories can be a really important medicine. Seeing yourself in a story is a really important medicine. Sharing stories with your families or being read to, right? Knowing that storytelling is a loving family activity. That's a really healthful thing, right? So to me, it's all kind of the same thing. Being a pediatrician, being a kids writer, it all comes from that same kind of place in my heart.
Yes, that's really good. Like, I also heard your TED Talk, and I think it was Albert Einstein who said, if you want your kids to be smart, then something like read them stories. And if you want them to be even more smart, then read them more stories.
Totally. And he even said, he's attributed as saying, if you want them to be smart, read them fairy tales. And if you want them to be more, read them more fairy tales. So stories and fantastical stories, they're really important. They're important for our intellectual growth, right? Literacy and, little kids learning speech and learning how to understand speech and create speech. They're important for our bonding with our families. They're important for our senses of self, and our sense of our community in the world. I don't know, stories really are good medicine.
Yes, they are. So, since we're at the topic of young audience, what is your favorite thing about like writing for children?
All of it. You know what the part I miss the most, Karen? I miss being able to go to schools. So a really fun part of being a children's author is that you can travel to a school and talk to kids about the writing process and, read them parts of your story, and make all the funny voices. Like, so this rock-kush monster, he always speaks in rhyme before he comes to chase people. And so I love making the funny voices. I love, being able to say, dirty socks and stinky feet, I smell royal human meat, as I'm reading the parts. And then I always make the joke like, well, why do monsters in all different cultures always make rhymes before they chase people? Why don't they just chase them? It seems like a waste of time. And, this isn't just a problem with Bengali monsters, I, tell kids at a school visit. But think about it, like fee, fi, fo, fum. I smell the blood of an Englishman, right? That's Jack and the Beanstalk. So it is a cross-cultural problem. Monsters wasting time making up rhyme before they chase people. So I miss, making silly jokes and making silly voices and learning from young friends, learning what they like, learning what they long for. So I love all the parts of being a children's author. I probably enjoy the most being able to talk to young readers and learn from them.
That's great. And whenever you put those rhymes in that the Rakosh said, I used to always like giggle at them because the amount of creativity in that, it was just very hilarious and very humorous.
And very silly, right? Good dose of silly is very important, I think, in any story, right? Especially in an adventure story, right? If you can't laugh while you're running, if there's a little rock push snot in your adventure, then what are you doing? No, I'm just kidding.
But yeah, so I think you talked a little bit about this already, but why is it important for kids to see themselves reflected positively in the books they read?
I think it's really important. There's a scholar, Dr. Rudine Sims Bishop, who came up with this idea of books can be mirrors. So books can be a way to see yourself reflected, right? And it's really important to see yourself not just reflected, but reflected positively, not only reflected in times of trial or tribulation or struggle, but also in moments of joy, right? That kids like you should be reflected having moments of joy. She also says that books can be windows into other people's experiences or sliding glass doors where you can actually enter whole new realms. So I think, Vern, it's both. I think, when I was little and I was missing seeing somebody like me as a hero, that was, the critical central thing I was missing. But after I've become, and that's what inspired, me to write the Kiranmala series. But I'll tell you the truth. What's been really interesting is that after I've published, Serpent Secret, Game of Stars, Chaos Curse, and then more recently, Force of Fire, I've gotten to talk to young fans some of whom share identities with Kiranmala or Pinky, the heroine of Force of Fire, and some of whom don't at all. Some of whom maybe aren't South Asian or aren't immigrant kids, but they see something else in Kiranmala that resonates with them, right? They're like, oh, well, Kiranmala's family isn't like my own, but I also struggled with, figuring out who I was, right? So I think it's just as important for kids to see themselves as it is for all of us to see a wide array of heroes. It's really important, I think, for somebody who doesn't look like Kiranmala to say, hey, that's my favorite hero, right? It's just as important as it is for somebody who looks like Kiranmala or who shares identities with Kiranmala to say that. So it's kind of both. The windows part is important and the mirrors part is important. They're both important.
That's great. And also, I read your Force of Fire and the Serpent Secret, and I noticed that the Force of Fire, it was like a timeline before the Serpent Secret, because I don't know how to pronounce his name. Sesha, the Serpent King. He was just like a child back then in Force of Fire. He was just like a prince. And the Moon Maiden as well was just a kid. And now in Serpent Secret, they're all kind of grown up. He's become the official king now.
Exactly. So that's why I wrote, the fun part of writing from your imagination, right, is that you can kind of go in multiple directions. So if you look on the back of Game of Stars, do you see the Rakushi queen, the kind of demoness queen?
Yes.
She's an adult, right? She's a grown-up. Her name is Pinky.
Oh.
Right. And so she's kind of fabulous and terrible, and right. And I won't tell you, but she's related to one of our heroes. I won't tell readers, in case they want to read it. But then this character, Pinky, is that same queen, only when she's younger. So I told you before that I liked Kiranmala. I also have kind of a soft spot for this demon queen, Pinky. And I liked her so much because she was so fabulous and so terrible. And I like making her voice sound like this, very husky. That I kind of wanted to explore why was she like that? And why was she, she kind of has a good heart, but she acts mean a lot of the times. And what could have happened to her as a young person that made her that way? So I got to write the books, the Force of Fire books to explore that.
Yeah, but now that you said that the demon queen is actually Pinky, it's just very shocking. I just realized that. And now everything's just coming together.
Right, that's the idea, right, for it all to come together. But just in case, Vern, somebody hasn't read the first book, right, we'll keep it a secret who Pinky's related to in the first book, who the demon queen is related to, right?
But I really love how you made the demon queen character. You made her seem very evil, but at the same time, she cares a lot about her son.
Yeah, she really does. I like characters who are not just good or bad, but have both aspects to them. And I think that, what we do each and every day makes us heroes or villains, not, what we look like or what family we're born into or any of that. And I think both Kiranmala and Pinky kind of explore that, what decision am I going to make when I'm faced with conflict? And is that going to be a good decision or a bad decision? Not just for me, but for everybody else around me. Oh,
Yes.
Varun, I think we're about maybe at 5-ish minutes before we should wrap up and go to the questions.
Okay. So, can you tell us about the first line fiction contest that you're judging for the Scope magazine?
Absolutely, I would be delighted to. So I think our friends might have seen a slide at the beginning about the Scope contest. I am honored to be judging the 2021-2022 Scope magazine contest. And the way it works is this. I have written 3 lines, first lines, to short stories that don't exist yet. And it's up to you, student writers, to take those first lines and fill in the story. So the way it goes is you choose your first line among the 3. You write a short story that begins with that line. And then you have your teacher or parent or guardian submit your finished short story to Scope's first line contest. And the really important thing to remember, all of that information, we'll make sure is available. But the important thing to remember is that you have to send in your story and the entry form by March 14th. So that's the date to remember, March 14th.
Okay, so one last question before we go to the Q&A questions. So describe your writing process. Do you write every day?
I try to write every day. I also still teach full time, so it doesn't always work out like that. I'll tell you a funny story. When I was writing the Kiranmala series, my kids were a bit younger. And so I would write any opportunity I had. I would write, how parents come to pick up kids after swim team practice or after school, how they wait in a line in their car. So I'd whip out my computer, my car would be stopped, when my car was parked, and I'd be typing on my computer in the car and pick up line. Or I would write on the back of my grocery list, while I was somewhere. Or I would have a computer open and I'd be cooking dinner and I'd be back and forth writing while I was cooking dinner and getting stuff on my computer, which don't do this. People don't be like me and get onions on your computer or whatever. It's not good. But you got to do what you got to do. And so when my kids were younger, that's kind of how it happened. And thinking back on it now kind of makes the onions on the computer. It makes me laugh.
Yep. Okay, so now let's head on to the Q&A questions. I'd like to answer a few questions from my peers listening in and commenting in the chat from their classrooms and at home. So our first question is from Allison in New York. What is your favorite children's book or series and why?
Oh, so I'll say Allison, thank you for your question. I'll say that when I was young, one of my favorite authors was Madeleine L'Engle, who wrote A Wrinkle in Time. And I loved that series. And I also loved her Meet the Austen series. And the reason I loved those books was that was the first time I realized that you could love science and you could love stories at the same time. And you could tell a fantastical story that was also full of fascinating science. You could be traveling to outer space or going inside a mitochondria, inside a cell. And that really opened up so much for me. And yet those stories are so full of family and heart and friendship. So Madeleine L'Engle's books, I would say, were my favorites when I was growing up.
That's great. So our next question is from Nick in Florida. How long on average does it take you to write a book?
So Nick, thank you for your question. I'm going to give you 2 really extreme answers. So The Serpent Secret, I wrote at the bedside with my kids, for my kids. Over years, I didn't realize I was going to publish it at first. So let's say 7 years between writing it and getting it published. And that whole time I'm tinkering with it, I'm editing it, I'm doing this, I'm doing that. I'm taking my, relaxing time with it. And then I sell it, which is so exciting. It's a dream, right? It's an author's dream. Mm-hmm. But I not just sell the first book, I sell 2 books, a second book that I haven't written yet. Yes. And that book I have to deliver in 7 months. So I had to really step up my game. I couldn't like be, cooking, doing other things. I had to really like be much more, on target, write at a faster pace, kind of imagine through what my plot was going to be. So I know that that's two really, really different time periods, 7 years versus 7 months. But I would say a few months, usually now I will write a rough draft of a novel for over a few months, 3-4 months, let's say. But then for it to become a book that you see on the shelves, it takes a number of more months. I go back and forth with an editor. I write, I rewrite, I fix it, I make it better. These wonderful, editors who look at my writing. There are these wonderful copy editors who make sure all my grammar is correct. We go through around with them. Then there's the brilliant cover designers and art directors. My covers for these books were made by someone called Vivian Toe. And the art direction was by someone named Elizabeth Parisi at Scholastic. And my wonderful editor is Abby McAdam at Scholastic. So, it takes a while because it's not just me. It's me and a whole wonderful team who help me make the books as good as they can be.
That's great. I'm sure Nick would love that answer. So Christina from Illinois wants to know, how do you get rid of writer's block?
Ooh, Christina, that's a great question. I would say, don't be nervous if you have writers, if you feel like, I don't know what to write. I don't know how to, everybody gets writer's block. These are the pieces of advice I give myself and my students, which is, if you're stuck, if nothing's coming to you, change it up, whatever that means. So that can mean change up what you're writing on. So go from a computer to a notebook, or a notebook to a computer, vice versa. Some writer friends I know even like speak parts of their books into a recording device, like a phone. You can also do things like read aloud. I do this a lot. What you've already written, you can read aloud to yourself, and that helps you kind of hear it a different way. I also might go like exercise, really like put down the book, go exercise. I get great ideas sometimes in the shower when I'm not thinking about the book or not supposed to be thinking about the book, or I'm just washing my hair or whatever. And the last piece of advice I'll say is sometimes when none of that works, I'll set a timer. So either on a phone or on a kitchen clock or whatever, I'll set a timer for 5 minutes or 10 minutes. That doesn't feel like too scary an amount of time, right, Varun? 5 minutes doesn't seem too bad, right?
Yep. Mm-hmm.
And so I set that timer and I say, I just have to write for the next 5 minutes. I just have to write for the whole 5 minutes. I can't go and look at my emails or go look at you. I have to write, but it's only for 5 minutes. And sometimes that relieves the pressure. And then once I write for that 5 minutes, maybe I realize I can write for another 5 and another 5. But I don't put that pressure on myself right away. I just tell myself, you only have to do it for this short amount of time. Like, you can do anything for 5 minutes. And that's sometimes how I like, you have to be, how you're kind to other people, and it's really important to be kind to other people. You also have to be kind to yourself. It's really important to be kind to yourself and not too hard on yourself. And so if something isn't working, it's okay. Like, you'll figure it out. Be kind to yourself and tell yourself, I only have to do it for this next 5 minutes. And maybe that'll help loosen something up.
Yes. I'm sure not only Christina has benefited from that, but even I've benefited, because sometimes when I write stories or essays, I get writer's block. So thank you for that advice personally.
Oh, thanks. I'm glad that resonated, Vern.
Okay, so thank you. So our next question is from Jaden in Texas. What is the most difficult part of your artistic process?
Ooh, Jaden, that's a very sophisticated question. What's the most difficult part of my artistic process? Sometimes when you have an idea that you love so much, it's like this beautiful, perfect gift. And then you're afraid to unwrap it because you're afraid the words you put down on the paper won't be as good as this like beautiful picture that you have in your head that you won't be able to live up to it. And sometimes I get intimidated, by that. I'm like, oh, I have this great idea, but will I be able to translate that onto the paper? Will I be able to do it justice? The Force of Fire, for instance, was inspired by the Indian Revolution. And my own grandfather went to jail at age 15 because he was a revolutionary. He fought for this idea called freedom, and he fought for what's now a free India. And I got really stuck. I got scared at one point. I thought, how can I do these great leaders, these great ancestors, these elders justice? Will my story be good enough to honor what they did, to honor their great work? And I got scared, and so that to me sometimes is really difficult. And I think I'll go back to my previous answer and say, be kind to yourself, be kind to yourself, because my grandfather, he's not with me anymore. He would have wanted me to be kind to myself, right? He wouldn't have wanted me to feel all stressed out about trying to honor his story. He would have said, I trust you. I believe in you. Whatever you do is good enough. And so I tried to kind of hear his voice in my head when I wrote the story. And similarly, just hear the voices of like all the people who love you and believe in you, if that's a teacher or a family member, or even somebody who's not with you anymore, like my grandfather, because they know you can do it. You can honor the thing that you want to write. You can do it, young writers. I believe in you.
Okay. That's very emotionally touching.
Oh, me too. I kind of got a little teary there talking about my grandfather. So I think we have like 5 minutes left. Varun, what do you think? Should we do like one more question from the chat here?
Okay.
Let's see. Oh my goodness. This question is really interesting. What are your thoughts about the multiverse? You want to answer that one together, Varun? You want to say what your thoughts about the multiverse are?
Okay, so the main way I kind of learned about the multiverse, it was from Marvel, from like Doctor Strange and Spider-Man. And I think it's a very fascinating topic. Like the same version of you, but just in a different world, doing the same things that you are doing today. It's a very boggling topic.
Right? It's fascinating. So the way I learned about string theory, and apologies to any physicists or young physicists out there, astrophysicists who know more about it than me, but the way I learned about it was that maybe there are multiple realities like strings on a guitar, which exist right up next to each other, but don't know about each other. But if you play one string, you know how if you play one string, the resonance can sometimes like make the other string hum. So there are ways, right, for each string to kind of impact the other. And again, I think I mentioned this earlier, Varun. For me, the multiverse, like you said, is mind-boggling and fascinating. And I'm a big science fiction fan, and I love it, in Star Wars and Star Trek and Marvel when, they talk about the multiverse. But it also seemed like a really cool metaphor. Like, I think that immigrant families, people who come from one place to another, they're kind of superhero, right? Because they straddle multiple realities at the same time. They know what's happening on one string dimension, even as they're living in another string dimension. And they can code switch, right? They can kind of go back and forth and speak in different languages and behave in different ways and different contexts. And so to me, that was a really exciting way to play with this idea that I already found so fascinating and mind-boggling, which is the idea of the multiverse. And that's why there's so much kind of black holes and string theory and stars and kind of space magic in the Kieran Wallace series.
Yes. Okay, so thank you so much for joining our live Scholastic Q&A. It was an honor to learn about your novels and your writing process. And thank you all for tuning in.
Thank you, Varun. I just want to say, before we end our wonderful talk, what an honor it was to speak to you today. And what a great interviewer you are. That was great. I mean, you moved me to tears with some of your questions. That was a really great interview. So thank you for being such a skilled and kind interviewer to me. And I'm really excited, friends out there, to read your entries for Scope's first line fiction contest. So, get writing, get your imaginations frothing. I can't wait to see what you come up with.
Yes, thank you. And your responses made it feel very personal. So thank you for this amazing experience.
Well, thank you, Varun. And should we tell folks to keep in touch and how they can?
Yes, so keep in touch. Follow Scholastic Teachers to get updates on our exclusive Scholastic events, including Book Fest for World Read Aloud Day, scheduled for January 31st to February 2nd. See you there.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.